Okay, so Xiong needs to take a class online. So this is for you, Xiong. Alright, so last time, did we do a little bit of test 8? I think we finished like 1 or 2.
We finished 2.
You finished 2? 1 and 2?
Intelligence.
Swarm intelligence, we finished that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the third one. And we're gonna finish test 8 today. This will be a conversation. So take your time, get ready to take notes. It's gonna be between a librarian and a student.
Listen to part of a conversation between a student and her history professor.
So I definitely want to write my term paper on American journalism in the 18th century. That old copy of the New York Daily Gazette you showed us, the one printed from the library's microfilm, just seeing a newspaper that was published in 1789, that was really cool.
Yes, reading old newspapers can be a powerful experience, especially to a budding historian like yourself. As a resource for scholars and researchers, I don't think any form of publication really captures the day-to-day life of a community better than a local newspaper.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that the number of newspapers exploded in the 18th century, but I figured they all deteriorated before the technology was invented to preserve them, or, make copies.
Well, actually, before the mid-1800s, newspapers were printed on fairly sturdy paper made from cotton fibers. Those that survived are in surprisingly good shape.
Are there many more copies of the Gazette on microfilm?
Yeah, we've got a great microfilm library on campus. You'll find it invaluable, I'm sure, as you research your paper. But also talk to the librarians because they're creating an online archive of their microfilm collection. I'm not sure of the project's status, but if it's done, it'll probably save you time. So, 18th century journalism. You must realize that that topic's too broad for this assignment.
I do. So one idea I had was like looking at an important world event, like maybe the French Revolution of 1789, since we just finished a unit on it. The readings you had given us were incredibly vivid. I loved them. But they were translations of French writers, historians. So I thought it'd be interesting to pick the Gazette and one other American newspaper to see how each covered the revolution, how the journalists reported it from America's perspective.
Interesting approach, but remember, I'll be grading your paper based on the details you include, and at some point in your paper, you'll want to focus on a particular event of the revolution, like maybe the storming of the Bastille prison.
How about the formation of the French National Constituent Assembly?
Sure, that would work.
And since I'm going to look at newspapers from 2 cities, I could read the editorials, the opinion pieces, to find out what each community thought about the National Assembly.
Okay, but I once attended a history conference where a professor presented a paper on the American press and the French Revolution. She was discussing the development of democratic ideals here and in France at the time. But she also pointed out that using old newspapers as primary sources to beware that they reflected the values of only a segment of society and should not be used to draw conclusions about all Americans. I don't think I held on to her paper, but it was subsequently published, so you'll have no trouble tracking it down on the internet. Let me give you her name.
That's it. For number 2, you need to choose 2 answers. Let me play it one more time, okay?
Listen to part of a
For this one, it was actually difficult to grasp the details because it goes by really quickly. So try to pay attention to every little details, like the comments that the professor or student made, okay?
conversation between a student and her history professor.
So I definitely want to write my term paper on American journalism in the 18th century. That old copy of the New York Daily Gazette you showed us, the one printed from the library's microfilm, just seeing a newspaper that was published in 1789, that was really cool.
Yes, reading old newspapers can be a powerful experience, especially to a budding historian like yourself. As a resource for scholars and researchers, I don't think any form of publication really captures the day-to-day life of a community better than a local newspaper.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that the number of newspapers exploded in the 18th century, but I figured they all deteriorated before the technology was invented to preserve them, or, make copies.
Well, actually, before the mid-1800s, newspapers were printed on fairly sturdy paper made from cotton fibers. Those that survived are in surprisingly good shape.
Are there many more copies of the Gazette on microfilm?
Yeah, we've got a great microfilm library on campus. You'll find it invaluable, I'm sure, as you research your paper. But also talk to the librarians because they're creating an online archive of their microfilm collection. I'm not sure of the project's status, but if it's done, it'll probably save you time. So, 18th century journalism. You must realize that that topic's too broad for this assignment.
I do. So one idea I had was looking at an important world event, like maybe the French Revolution of 1789, since we just finished a unit on it. The readings you had given us were incredibly vivid. I loved them. But they were translations of French writers, historians. So I thought it'd be interesting to pick the Gazette and one other American newspaper to see how each covered the revolution, how the journalists reported it from America's perspective.
Interesting approach, but remember, I'll be grading your paper based on the details you include, and at some point in your paper, you'll want to focus on a particular event of the revolution, like maybe the storming of the Bastille prison.
How about the formation of the French National Constituent Assembly?
Sure, that would work.
And since I'm going to look at newspapers from two cities, I could read the editorials, the opinion pieces, to find out what each community thought about the National Assembly.
Okay, but I once attended a history conference where a professor presented a paper on the American press and the French Revolution. She was discussing the development of democratic ideals here and in France at the time. But she also pointed out that using old newspapers as primary sources to beware that they reflected the values of only a segment of society and should not be used to draw conclusions about all Americans. I don't think I held on to her paper, but it was subsequently published, so you'll have no trouble tracking it down on the internet. Let me give you her name.
I think number 4 might have been a little difficult because it just happens in one comment of the student. This and this. So your original choices were correct. It's okay. And this one. Like I said, this one was a little hard. We'll go over it together. Let's do it together, okay? For number 1, we know that they're talking about the student's topic for her research paper and how to conduct the research properly using different sources, right? So number 1, the answer method B, using old newspapers to conduct historical research. And for number 2, what gave the student inspiration for the topic of her term paper? She looked at one of the old newspapers from France, and she thought it was really cool, right? And so that one was C. And then she also talks about reading a translation of French historical accounts. Let's go to the script right there. And then she says, if you look at the students' comment that's highlighted right in the middle, the readings you've given us were incredibly vivid. So the professor has also provided the students with some other articles, reading materials, and then the student loved them. But then they were translations of French writers. So the content of the materials that were given to them is presented later by the student. Does that make sense? So at first she just says, oh, what you gave us was really vivid, right? 생동감 있고, right? Very descriptive. She liked it, but the problem for her was that it was a translated versions of French writers and historians. So she thought it would be interesting to pick the Gazette, the old French newspaper, and other American newspaper to see how each covered the French Revolution from their own perspectives. Does that make sense? So it has to be C and D. And accounts refer to any form of words, speeches, or writings. Okay? Good? I think we could get rid of A because this is simply a recommendation given by the professor so that the student could find more resources. And then B, a long-standing interest in the history of France. We're not talking about the general history of France. We're only looking at particular situations, but the different perspectives using the resources. And then 3, according to the professor, what should the student ask the librarians to see if there's an online archive available? They're working on it, so if it's ready and available for students, then she could use that as well, which would make her research process easier. Okay, so it was C, right? If the old newspapers she wants to read are available online yet. All good so far? Okay. Number 4, what will the student probably include in her term paper? Go back to the script, please. And then if you look at that one line of comment of the student, she asks, how about the formation of the French National Constituent Assembly? So she's asking the professor if it would be okay to use this as one of her topics. And then the professor goes, sure, that would work. So she has received an approval from the professor, so it's likely that she's going to use it. Right? Because she doesn't change her mind by the end of the conversation. Okay? All right, what will the student probably include? Newspaper coverage of the French National Constituent Assembly. You look at B, this was just an example of something that could be included, and this was mentioned by the professor. Right? It was simply a recommendation or an example. And then C, ways in which the French Revolution contributed to the development of democratic ideals. We're not talking about democratic ideals. And indeed, how the reporting of American journalists differ from that of French. This is something that they're interested in, including in her essay, but that is not the topic, right? The topic is more specific in terms of what is going to be dealt with, okay? But she's definitely going to include the different perspectives. Number 5, what can be inferred about the professor when he discusses a paper presented at a historical conference? He says there was a lady who's delivering a speech, and according to her, it's very risky to use newspapers as the only form of resource because it does not necessarily represent all Americans or the general public of certain societies, right? So that is B. He worries that the student will overgeneralize American attitudes based on the content of newspapers. Okay? Are there any questions? Anything that you didn't understand? Okay, good. Let's move on to a lecture. Try to use of blue. If you go to the question really quickly, the question sets, go to take a look at it, and if you look at number 2, you'll see the name Gainsborough. That's how you spell it. But just use a capital G whenever he's mentioned. Okay? Because the name is still long. Okay.
Listen to part of a lecture in an art history class.
Okay, so when we were discussing Gainsborough's painting The Blue Boy, which he painted in 1770, I mentioned the story that the painting might have been an experiment, the result of a challenge. It was believed that blue couldn't be an important color in the painting because, well, it tends to recede into the background. Not good for your main subject, right? So, to show otherwise, Gainsborough created the Blue Boy, with the boy featured large in his famous blue clothes, and, well, I guess he proved his point. But there was another challenge to blue. It was very, very expensive back then. Now, of course, because of modern chemistry, any color is available in tubes at any art supply store. But in the 18th century and before, it wasn't so easy. And blue, well, the color ultramarine, the most desired shade of blue, was made from the precious stone lapis lazuli, which had to be imported all the way from Afghanistan. And the second most favored shade of blue, after ultramarine made from lapis lazuli, was a shade of blue that came from another precious stone, azurite. But azurite was, well, harder to work with. There's evidence that artists would try to get around these difficulties. For example, use pigment from lapis lazuli or azurite very sparingly, and also use something cheaper, like smalt, which was made of ground glass. Thing is, smalt became discolored over time. So many artists probably just avoided blues altogether, rather than use something cheap and impermanent. So, blue, and especially ultramarine pigment, was a luxury, a status symbol, worth even more than gold at times. And you even had the wealthy ordering paintings with ultramarine to show others that they could afford something made from this precious pigment, much in the same way they'd ordered gold leaf. Actually, the ancient Egyptians did manage to make an artificial blue, the first synthetic pigment, in fact, if you can believe that. They passed the formula on to the Greeks and Romans, but then it was lost. Anyway, not only was lapis lazuli hard to get, it was also hard to process. The recipe was difficult. The stone had to be ground finely, not easy to do with rock. Then mixed with melted wax, resins, and oils, wrapped in a cloth and kneaded like bread dough. The fine particles of ultramarine were then separated from the rest. The process was time-consuming, which also contributed to the high cost of producing ultramarine, and it didn't even yield very much usable pigment. As a result, the French government sponsored a competition in 1824 to find a cheaper way to make ultramarine pigment. And soon after, a process was demonstrated where a combination of coal, sulfur, and other cheap, commonplace substances were heated, creating a suitable synthetic substitute for lapis lazuli. So, there's no doubt that 19th century artists, after good synthetic versions were available, used more ultramarine. Think of the Impressionists, for example. They had a lot more choices, or at least less expensive choices, than painters not that long before them.
What is the lecture name?
Let's do number 6 first. Number 6, the comment is, actually, the ancient Egyptians did manage to make an artificial blue, the first synthetic pigment, in fact, if you can believe that. Why does the professor imply when he says this? Actually, the ancient Egyptians did manage to make an artificial blue, the first synthetic pigment, in fact, if you can believe that. And then for number 4, you need 2 answers. Have you gone over all the questions at least once? Yes? Okay, when you listen this time, don't take notes. Just look at the board. Just pay attention, focus on the lecture. But whenever he comes down to this section right here, pay extra attention. And then later on, over here. Okay? Let's give it a nutshell.
The Blue Boy. Discussing Gainsborough's painting, The Blue Boy, which she painted in 1770. I mentioned the story that the painting might have been an experiment, the result of a challenge. It was believed that blue couldn't be an important color in the painting, because, well, it tends to recede into the background. Not good for your main subject, right? So, to show otherwise, Gainsborough created the Blue Boy, with the boy featured large in his famous blue clothes, and, well, I guess he proved his point. But there was another challenge to blue. It was very, very expensive back then. Now, of course, because of modern chemistry, any color is available in tubes at any art supply store. But in the 18th century and before, it wasn't so easy. And blue, well, the color ultramarine, the most desired shade of blue, was made from the precious stone lapis lazuli, which had to be imported all the way from Afghanistan. And the second most favored shade of blue, after ultramarine made from lapis lazuli, was a shade of blue that came from another precious stone, azurite. But azurite was, well, harder to work with. There's evidence that artists would try to get around these difficulties. For example, use pigment from lapis lazuli or azurite very sparingly, and also use something cheaper, like smalt, which was made of ground glass. Thing is, smalt became discolored over time. So many artists probably just avoided blues altogether, rather than use something cheap and impermanent. So, blue, and especially ultramarine pigment, was a luxury, a status symbol, worth even more than gold at times. And you even had the wealthy ordering paintings with ultramarine to show others that they could afford something made from this precious pigment, much in the same way they'd order gold leaf. Actually, the ancient Egyptians did manage to make an artificial blue, the first synthetic pigment, in fact, if you can believe that. They passed the formula on to the Greeks and Romans, but then it was lost. Anyway, not only was lapis lazuli hard to get, it was also hard to process. The recipe was difficult. The stone had to be ground finely, not easy to do with rock. Then mixed with melted wax, resins, and oils, wrapped in a cloth and kneaded like bread dough. The fine particles of ultramarine were then separated from the rest. The process was time-consuming, which also contributed to the high cost of producing ultramarine, and it didn't even yield very much usable pigment. As a result, the French government sponsored a competition in 1824 to find a cheaper way to make ultramarine pigment. And soon after, a process was demonstrated where a combination of coal, sulfur, and other cheap, commonplace substances were heated, creating a suitable synthetic substitute for lapis lazuli. So, there's no doubt that 19th century artists, after good synthetic versions were available, used more ultramarine. Think of the Impressionists, for example. They had a lot more choices, or at least less expensive choices, than painters not that long before them.
So after discussing how rare, the minerals were that had to be used in order to produce the color blue, he then addresses how ancient Egyptians were able to do that back in the days, right? They were able to do such a complex, able to create this complex color. So he's actually impressed, right? So according to that, number 6, that has to be B. A, he's delivering a fact, so A cannot be correct. C, being widely known. Now, if it was, then he would have mentioned it as if, you should probably all know, but, And then D, the Egyptian painting was of a lower quality, not mentioned. Okay? So it talks about how the color blue was very, very difficult to produce back in the days. And so that is D. And then later on at the end, it finally talks about how 19th century artists were able, or 19th century artists had more access to the color blue, thanks to how the French government invested in coming up with like a cheaper, more accessible, available substitute, right? So that only happens at the end. And then number two, his goal, because people believed that blue couldn't be an important color in paintings, especially since the color tended to recede into the background, he wanted to prove them wrong and came up with his particular painting with this boy wearing a big blue clothes, right? And he proved this point, meaning it was an impressive work. Okay, but the other problem of using color blue was the fact that it was expensive. Okay, so using that, number two, he painted this piece of work in order to contradict or disagree with a common belief about the use of blue in a painting. Does that make sense? And then three, smalt was mentioned after the two different kinds of minerals that were required in order to produce the color blue. The problem with smalt was that it discolored over time, so the color would fade away, right? And therefore, artists probably wanted to avoid using smalt, right? Or they couldn't use the more expensive kind, so they just decided not to use the color blue like altogether. So that one would be C. Smalt was not of an acceptable quality for many artists because it would fade. Get it? A, eventually, not mentioned. B, no, not mentioned. D, better? No, it was just a cheaper substitute with a very big disadvantage. And then number four, we talked about this here, right? And then now you know. It was time consuming and also it didn't even yield that much pigment. So after going through all of this complex process, the amount of pigment that they could get out of it was not enough. Like it's not worth the time and effort, right? So that's what yielding means, like to yield something, to produce something. So A, took a lot of time as well as didn't produce much pigment. And number five, why does the professor mention the French government? They worked on trying to come up with a cheaper substitute, right? That was of good quality. So B, to emphasize the importance of developing an affordable, a cheaper blue pigment. Good? All right, that's it. Let's pause listening here, and then after your break, we'll try, do you want to do a little bit of writing? Just a little bit, you don't have to finish it. Maybe we could focus on like one paragraph and try to see how much your expressions have improved. Maybe I'll ask you guys to write one body paragraph. Yeah? Okay. And then if we have any extra time after that one paragraph of writing, we'll come back to listening. Okay? All right. Is anybody getting too hot?
No.
Yes. Let me send you those listening files first, and then I'll come back, okay? And how much do you think you'll be able to finish? I don't know how much to send you.
Actually, I think that listening is my biggest problem, so I think I should practice them
Okay.
as much as I can.
Let me pause this. Okay, so today's topic for our independent writing is on page 7. Do you agree or disagree with the following statement? The government should spend money on building, spend money to build new parks. Use specific reasons and examples to support your essay. Another very boring topic. But again, the good news is that we're probably very used to coming up with reasons to support these kind of topics. Yes? No? Let's talk about the pros and cons, okay? So if governments were to spend more money on building new parks, what would be the advantages? Families would have more access to nature.
Environment.
Yes, eco-friendly environment. More access to. Because environment itself just means everything around us. So natural environment, a natural environment. That doesn't sound right. Or eco-friendly, yeah, sure. Or green. Environment, right? Number 2, more space to work out, exercise, jog, ride the bicycle, because cities can be dangerous, right? What? You have a better idea? Do you have a better idea? Okay, safer environment for sporting activities. Okay, so you can always just come up with 2 supporting ideas and write long paragraphs using reasons and a bunch of examples. But if you're just not a good writer, because every time somebody asks you for reasons, your answer is simply just because I have no opinion, then you're gonna want to come up with a 3rd one. What could be another one? What would you like to do at parks? Let's say there is a park being built in your neighborhood. What would excite you? Or what would be something good about it? Or what would be something really bad about it? Wow. I mean,
Oh,
it could decrease pollution problems.
that's the second reason.
No, I'm talking, safer means like
That's
less,
first-
like
first.
fewer accidents.
Not second, I think it's the first one.
But that has nothing to do with their health. That's just entertainment. Quality time with your family and children. The 3rd one is talking about the global, I don't know, like environmental issues, pollution, right? If you don't like it, you don't have to use it. I feel like you're gonna choose the other one.
No.
Right? Especially air, noise, right? What else? What else? What other pollution? Light. You know there's like light pollution, where it's just bright all the time, and that can stress people out? Look up your dictionary for other words. There's something like that. It talks about it in one of your TOEFL passages. What other pollution can we reduce by building parks?
Global warming.
Okay. Very grand, but okay. I mean, we can talk about this as, an ongoing issue and say building more parks would be beneficial to handling, problems associated with global warming, right? Like you can just address this. We don't want to say it's going to solve, solve global warming or decrease the level of global warming because, that's too grand, right? But one step at a time. All right, so those would be the pros. And then for the cons, what? Less space, less parking space.
Less space.
Less space for what? Let's be a little bit more specific, not for your topic sentence, but for your reasons and examples. We're brainstorming here. For what? Less space for what?
For another important social infrastructure.
Oh, okay. Such as?
Such as house.
Housing.
Parking lots.
What else? Housing.
Housing or that's it. Parking lots.
Parking lots, police stations, fire departments, more access closer to homes, right? Fire, police departments. Oh. Yeesh. Okay, what else? There could be increased crime rate at nighttime because it's dark in the park. Maybe? No?
But I think that the most of parks
Or safer.
This light, carving all the time.
Street lights.
Street lights.
Okay, then what else? You rejected one of mine, so it's your turn to come up with one. Huh? Taxes. Right. We spend taxes on building such things. Why don't we use those on immediate needs, right? On dealing with more immediate issues. Right? What else? Couldn't you write a lot about these two though? Like one example could talk about maybe housing, why we're in desperate need of adding more houses or apartment complexes. And then the next example could talk about like a government-related offices, right? Yeah? So I think you could like write a whole bunch about these because there are different aspects we can approach regarding this issue. And then for this one, also talk about two different issues that need to be resolved right away, besides these, right? It could be something like reducing crime rate, or sending students to school, or giving financial aid to students in need, or helping homeless people, right? Instead of a park, you could build like a homeless shelter, a shelter for homeless people, and then provide them with, you know, food and a safe shelter, right? Yeah? Or more schools, or more financial aids. Not just to students, but, you know, just, yeah? Anything else?
No, I cannot imagine what it is.
Okay. And then also, parks would be built in cities. Properties in the cities are usually expensive. If we were to build a public park there, then the city itself would be losing revenue. You know, the money that they can incur from that space, right? By, I don't know, building a tourist attractions or whatnot, right? So decrease revenue, meaning less profit, right? We're wasting the space. Right? So I think you guys could use either this or that, but how about for today, we'll just focus on writing one body paragraph, meaning you just have to choose one of these six. But I want the body paragraph to consist of two sufficient amount of examples. I don't want the examples to be like 2 or 3 sentences long. I want it to be very specific, detailed, with something that the readers can relate to. Okay? Try to make it as visual as possible. I want it to be graphic. You know what I'm saying? So that the readers can picture what you're talking about instead of just giving them like an ambiguous abstract idea. Okay? All right, so let's give that a shot. Just one paragraph. Feel free to construct an outline first, all for the body paragraph, or you can just get straight to the writing. When you're done, raise your hand. Where'd it go? Did I take it?
No.
Oh, is it there?
Yeah.
I can just rip it off. Do you want a piece of paper for your writing?
Yes.
Do you have a notebook? I have extra paper, it's okay. The spaces are white on purpose so that I can give you notes. Alright. You should have included this, but not only that, but look at this. After 접속사 that, you need a full sentence, like a complete independent clause. 그치?
Yeah.
Right? But if you take a look here, it's okay to have a very long subject for a sentence, but from here to here is your subject, and this is your verb, right? Right. No, it's okay to be
Yes.
long, but the thing is, a subject cannot start with a verb or like a 과거분사. Like it can be a 과거분사, but this is not modifying anything. 수식하는 거 없어. 그러면 하는 것은 이렇게 만드는 것은 좋을 거다. Is what you're trying to say, right? So it has to be 동명사.
International Certification Program 저걸로 수식하려고.
이거 하기 위해서 얘를 만드는 것은 will be a good case. 이렇게 말하고 싶어서, right? So 뭐뭐 하는 것은, if that's the subject, the formal subject you're trying to use, it has to be an ing or a to infinitive. Okay? So that was the problem, the grammatic problem with this sentence, whether or not you included the US or not. And then moving on. 근데 이런 실수를 많이 하는 것 같아요. 문장을 만들 때 기본적으로 정보를 다 넣는 데 집중하니까 문장의 구조가 뒤틀리거든요. 근데 문장 구조가 틀리면 아무리 좋은 내용을 넣어놔도 점수가 바로 아깝게. Yeah. 그래서 that's why I told you always focus on the information you're trying to convey in the beginning. Don't try to use big words. Don't try to make your sentence structures fancy. In the beginning, all you're doing is you are organizing sentences. 하나 laying them out. 와열하는 거니까 idea. And then you can focus on making it look more sophisticated. And read this. The reading passage claims that American consumers distrust advertisements and certifications. 이렇게 읽어줘. Because this and this are two nouns that are very similar in characteristics. Does that make sense? So,
다른 문장을 익힐 수 있다.
exactly. 그러다 보면, but if you take another look at it, now we know. But who has the time? You know, I don't think the evaluators would spare that much time for you personally, you know? So you just want to play safe. 근데 중요한 게 봐봐. 일단은 여기서도 value of product and consumers will prefer 하는데 이것도 and로 문장이 연결이 되면서 조금 부자연스럽게 느껴져요. 과하게 길어져 문장이. And this is not even a very advanced word. Does that make sense? So there's no loss for you when avoiding using this word. So I would just try to avoid using and altogether. That's for you. If I could. 그러니까 and를 안 쓰려고 하면 다 해결되는 문제야. Okay? but도 마찬가지. I told you in the very beginning that you should refrain from starting sentences with and or but. Remember? Yes. but 대신에 in contrast, meanwhile, on the other hand. 이런 것들을 쓰면 좋아. 근데 이제 이거를 안 쓰게 된 이유가 아마 sometimes it doesn't sound right to use words like conversely. It sounds a little too big or whatever. 막 반대로 이런 뜻이 아닌데 그냥 근데 그 반면에 얘네는 생각이 조금 달라 이 뉘앙스, right? In that case, you want to use something like meanwhile or on the other hand. Then it will resolve your issue with using, awkward expressions. In contrast, 이런 게 너무 세다, then just change to meanwhile or on the other hand.
So the problem happened by using and, then should I remove and then just use a comma?
Yeah, no. Period.
Period.
New
No,
sentence.
no.
Yeah.
No comma, no comma.
Exactly. 여기다 끊고 start anew,
Okay.
which would have been completely fine. 근데, but I feel like it's not, connected very naturally, then add in addition.
In addition.
Or please don't use also.
Also, I don't use that.
Okay. In addition, furthermore, moreover, besides, I gave you the transition list, right? To
Yes.
use those. So try to do that instead. I think you should just try your best to not use air. It'll resolve so many issues. 그리고 when you're using a word as a noun, sometimes because the words, when it comes to the words that you can also use as verbs, I think you frequently omit articles, all of them.
Oh.
Because you're used to not using those articles in front of these words when you're using it as a noun.
So we can be confused to.
When you're writing it, because it doesn't sound that wrong to you.
To me.
Yeah, but it's wrong.
But it's wrong. Oh my god.
Noun은 언제나 you need an article, always, unless it's a plural. Plural도 특정할 때는 you need the. But as in general, when you're talking about something that is not in particular, 그러면 you want to say an apple, right? Then instead you say apples. But let's say you already talked about that, or you're referring to a certain type of demands, because in this case we're talking about demands for products in the lumber industry, or anything that is related to the environmental issues, right? That concerns any sort of environmental issues, then we're talking about particular kinds of demands, and therefore you need the. Especially when you're using of, preposition of,
Yes.
A of B는 얘도 they always need to be nouns. 그래서 여기 앞에는 언제나 article이 들어가. Does that make sense? Unless you're talking about something in general and something plural. 근데 그럴 경우는 거의 없을 거란 말이에요. 그리고 plural이더라도 너 붙이는 건 상관없어.
The consumer.
Because you're talking about particular people, particular products, particular situations. You're writing about something very specific. So try to include or the at least. Okay? 이런 거는 솔직히 크게 괜찮아. It's okay. 근데 이런 것들, 여기 똑같은 상황이거든. Demands for products. The severity of environmental problems. 그리고 언제나 한 가지여야만 하는 경우가 아니면 just keep it plural.
Oh.
Keep your options open to various things, right? Because when you end up wanting to include more details, let's say you have 5 minutes left after you feel like you finished your essay, at least the first draft, and then you want to include more details, all of a sudden you might start writing about certain environmental problems. Like you could give a very specific example of some consumers being concerned with air pollution, right? But that's only going to be an example. That's not going to be the only environmental issue, right? So just keep everything plural if possible, and include them. 그렇다고 the severities of the environmental problems 이러는 게 아니라, you know what I'm saying? And since we're talking about that, well, the types of demand 이렇게 하잖아. 그러면은 얘네는 demand라는 건 사실 셀 수 있는 게 아닐 때도 있잖아.
네.
그러면 그 앞에 셀 수 있는 애로 이렇게 쓰는 게 더 안전할 수 있어. Types of, the kinds of, the sorts of, the number of something. 하면 이 뒤에를 단수로 그냥 내버려둬도 whether it's countable or not, you're playing safe. Does that make sense?
Okay.
그리고 마지막에 I think somehow you decided to just end it. But I know you had more details that could be included here. Maybe you just didn't feel sure enough to include that, or some like grammatical problem issues or whatever. But it's just simply not enough info.
Actually, I tried to add more things, but
Yeah, I
it was
can tell.
so unnatural.
That American lumber companies sell their products domestically, but you're not talking about why they're doing this, how this becomes part of, you know, increasing their interest in going with certification programs. It doesn't, it's just too abrupt, like domestic, where is this coming from? There's no explanation. It was explained in the listening, right? So it needs to be included. Get it? Your test is in a couple days. You want to play safe, okay? Just try to avoid and. Don't start sentences with but, and then keep your sentences short. If it gets too long, you don't know what to do, don't panic, just cut it.
Just cut it.
Cut it, period, and then start anew. If you feel like you want a more natural flow with them two together, then just include a transition in the middle. Like additionally, or besides, or what else could there be? To be specific, in other words. Right, but don't use in other words. That's another thing that students need to stop saying, because every time the students will use in other words in order to address something similar but a little different, but then it's not in other words. They're adding more information. In other words can only be used when you're trying to rephrase the previous sentence to help the readers with their understanding. Are you following? So just try to include transitions in between, just cut it in half, especially when your subjects turn out to be long. You're gonna have a 90% chance of making a grammar error that you don't see.
90%?
제일 쉬운 거는 학생들이 제일 문장 쓸 때 시작을 이걸 생각을 못하는 게 there is, there are, or there was, 뭐가 있다, or it is, 가져 it. 이렇게 문장을 시작을 안 하니까 문장이 한정적이고 생긴 게 그러다 보니까 이렇게 주어가 길어지거든. So you could just use it. It would be a good case too. 네, problem solved.
That's simple.
Right. That is the core purpose of why Americans came up with 가져 it. Okay? So they use that. And then there is, there are 같은 것도. Or according to, or in terms of, 뭐랑 관련해서, in terms of. Or regarding 뭐뭐. 이런 걸로 시작합니다. 아니면 뭐 despite of, 이런 거. Right? 근데 despite는 바로 now 와야 돼. You don't need of. Despite now. The same one would be in spite of, and then now. Right? Well, although, while. You used those sentence structures before, right?
Yes.
Right? But I told you to try to eliminate using commas, right? Just try to do that.
Teacher, but I want to ask you a question that in the interior writing, 한국어 지금 영어 지금 그게 좀 어려워가지고.
Efficiency is key right now, so go.
그러니까 여기 문단에 세 개가 있잖아요.
Yeah.
세 개씩.
Yeah.
근데 이게 시작할 때
Yeah.
약간 reading passages claims that American 뭐 어쩌고 그리고 however the lecture claims that 이런 약간 이렇게 대화가 흘러간 형식을 조금 다 바꾸는 게 좋겠죠.
No, it doesn't matter.
아 그래요?
그냥 reading claim이 lecture와 contrasting한 그 내용을 한 번 딱 쳐주고 listening에 대한 내용을 전부 넣어주는 게 키야.
listening.
이 앞에 reading passage claims that, however, but the listening 뭐 contradicts this idea by stating that. 이거는 왜 내가 참표를 잘하고 그러냐면 그 문장 생각하느라고 시간 낭비하지 말라고. The key point is like your main goal for integrated writing is to address all the details that you heard in the lecture.
그러니까 지금
그게 포인트야.
이제 디테일에 엄청 신경 쓰고
그렇지.
리딩 패시지가 뭐하지만 렉처는 이렇게 완벽한데 이 형식은 계속 유지해.
TOEFL is not about creativity. It's about did you get it? Did you get it though? Did you get even those the teeny tiny details? And on top of that, is the student able to paraphrase these? 그러니까 들은 걸 그대로 쓰면 okay, like 70% sure. 근데 그거를 심지어 paraphrase super 이렇게 되는 거죠. Right? 근데 시간이 모자라 일단 들은 거 그냥 그대로 무대로 탔어. 그러고 나서 시간이 남을 때 그런 여유를 부려야지. 문법 틀려가면서 막 유려하게 막 쓴다고 막 단어 바꿔대고 이러면 like what's the point, right? Exactly. Speaking이나 writing은 너무 좋으신 거죠. 다만 뭐 너무 이제 다 어휘가 basic level에 머물면 then of course the reader's gonna think, okay, this kid, you know, 미국에 뭐 어릴 때 뭐 입양 갔다 왔나 그냥 이렇게 느낄 수 있어, right? 근데 뭐 단어 뭐 implement or 여기 쓰는 뭐 contradict, perspective 이런 거 몇 개만 들어가도 they're gonna be like, okay, right? Because it's not Korean 수능 teachers that are evaluating your papers. They are Americans who would consider you guys learning English in a school, you know, in a Western education system, right? So that's the point. Get it? 이게 중요한 거는 어색하게 들리는 순간 저자 화가 막 갈게요. So replace it.
라이팅 같은 경우는 점수 변동이 심한 편일까요?
No, not really. 그냥 못 읽겠어. 밑에 최하 점수. 오케이. 근데 grammar mistake이 조금 이게 좀 거슬리게 좀 눈에 띄는 게 한 두세 개 있네. 그러면 이제 그 바로 위에. 근데 overall good. 근데 단어들이 너무 베이직하네. 센텐스 스트럭처 다 비슷하네. 아이디어도 좀 없네. 그럼 중간. 아이디어 풍부해. 단어 괜찮아. minor grammar errors 그럼 만점 맞을 가능성이 있어.
So the grammatic error is kind of
grammatic error는 소통하는데 문제가 될 만큼 너의 아이디어가 컨베이 되는데 방해가 되지 않는 정도면 it's okay. 네. 근데 문장이 다 너무 전형적으로 똑같은 애들 있잖아. 다 똑같이 있어. 근데 내용이 없어. You know? reason이 뭔가 logical 하지 않아. Like something like governments should build more parks because building parks is good for the people. 그 다음에 in other words, people will benefit from more parks in the city. 이렇게 쓰는 애들이 오케이 그러면 약간 5점 만점에서 예를 들어 3.2점 이렇게 나오는 거지. 근데 만약에 일단 logical flow가 있어. Like you have your own original ideas and it is effectively expressed in your essay with minor grammar errors, then you're good. 인티그레이션은 내가 listening 이렇게 다 들었어요를 보여주는 게 포인트야. 멋있게 뭐 진짜 뭐 조금 나의 라이팅을 뽐내는 건 independent. 대신 이제 막 그 연주할 때도 즉흥 연주하다가 막 갑자기 저기 달나라로 가는 애들 있잖아. 그러면서 글 쓰다가 와 하면서 갑자기 막 저기까지 막 얘기가 떠가버리면 안 되고. Right? Always stick to the point. Always make sure all of everything that you're writing about is supporting the topic in the end. 너무 impress 시키려고 할 필요 없어요. They grade hundreds of essays on a daily basis. They probably spend less than 10 seconds on it. Yeah.
Really?
Would you?
Oh.
Like, let's say your job is to evaluate these like mediocre essay writing that's not even going to be published, you know, for 6 hours a day.
Oh my god.
Like, would you spare more than 10 seconds on an essay of strangers?
No.
Exactly, and that's not even interesting. They're reading the essays that are on the same topic.
So that's why the minor grammar error is not a problem.
Exactly. They're probably like glimpse at it, like, okay, bye. Like, okay, this was bad. Okay, this was okay. Ooh, big words. Okay, oh, let me read that sentence just to be sure. And then, like, it's good. Okay. Right. So, what is the popular belief? Did you state it? Is it this? Because it's widely believed that's the popular belief.
Uh,
Why is it widely believed though?
It's 솔직히 말해서.
아니, no. I know that, but in these circumstances, if I were you, I would say,
Some people.
there are many different facets or aspects in which governments can invest their funding,
아,
right? Something. 그러니까 다양한 게 많이 이렇게 있죠. 그 중에서 popular issue 중에 하나는 whether to build more parks or not. I personally agree or disagree that more parks should be built through government funding. You know, do you see the flow? 그래서 이것도 that template is just to play safe. 근데 상황에 따라서, you know, looking at what is that called? Looking at the topic. If it's something that regards a social issue, then you want to talk about how there are many others and many different people have their own personal perspectives on each. And in this case, according to here, some people there's a controversial, or this can be a controversial issue as well. I personally believe this should happen. Do you see the flow? That's what I would do. You're not really including a lot of new information, like you're not really showing off your knowledge on anything, but there's a flow. And you don't even have to think that hard. So, numerous social issues that people are concerned with. In terms of urban development. One popular subject is whether to build more parks. This is not, this is independent, right?
Yes.
More parks in cities. And then usually 중학교 문법에서는 whether and then you want to say or not, right? 근데 essay 이제 at your level whether 썼으면 you can omit or not. Don't omit it. So you say without Describe contradicting opinions. I personally agree or disagree. I'll say just agree that, and then full sentence. So this is how we would utilize the introduction. Safe and easy. You can use this anywhere. I mean, you have the template, but I usually always write mine like this because you can use this for any topic. Because in this world, there are so many problems. Many people have opinions on each. Everybody has their own opinions, but I personally think this, right? So you're respecting everybody else's. You respect different opinions, but you also have a backbone to express that you have your own original idea as well. So that's what I do. And then I move on to the body, finish it, and then if I feel like the intro is too short compared to the body, or I feel like I could include more details here, then I'll do so. But the paragraphs don't necessarily have to be well balanced in terms of the quantity. Like the length shouldn't be too much of a problem, as long as your bodies are really, really good. So that's what I would do. Any questions so far? Not yet?
Not yet.
If you have any, just let me know, anytime. It's just you two anyways. Remember I gave you a speaking template last time? Do you have it?
Yes.
Speaking template? So I realized this one includes the topics from the old TOEFL, so we're only gonna look at task 2.
But
That one's more related to the new TOEFL. Starting with here to here, I make my students memorize this, and then I would give you a different topic. For example, field trip, right? 다 썼어? 쉬고 있었어? 아직 덜 썼어? 덜 썼어? 그래? I'll take a look at it soon. So for example, after you have memorized that, my random question that is similar to that one but different would be, do you agree or disagree? What you have learned from classroom is important. It's the first one. You're going to have to use the first sample to answer this question. But you're not using the exact same one. You're switching it a little bit, but you're basically using the exact same example. For example, wait, where is it? I don't think I have it. Do you have the speaking template, Doya? If you don't have it, oh, good. No, not that one, the other one. Do you have it as well? So for group no, it's task 2. Go to the third page, or the second page. The third, here, it says task 2. So field trip versus classroom. Some people say that it is better for children or students to go on a field trip. Others say that it is better for them to study in classrooms. And then here it says, I believe it is better for children to study in classrooms since their first priority should be to concentrate on academic studies, right? So if I were to switch a question and ask you, do you agree or disagree to the following statement? What you have learned from classroom is important. Then I would change this to, what students study in classrooms is very important. Expanding knowledge is the most important thing for blah, blah, blah. You know, does that make sense to you? So I would utilize this information, but switch like the beginning or some of the words in the sample to match the new question. Do you understand? But it has to be, you have to learn this by heart, meaning 외워야 돼. Or else it's going to be more difficult for you to to improvise. 즉흥적으로 하기 어려워. So you need to have all of these learned by heart so that you're fully ready for any questions. Okay. So what I'm going to ask you to do later after a break is to memorize the first 3 okay, the first 3 samples. I'm going to have you memorize them, and then we're going to try answering different questions by recalling your memories. Got it? Okay. Feel free to do that during your break, or I'll give you some extra time afterwards. But let me look at your writing book. 문제는, let me turn that over. Just an excuse not to show up. Okay, before we move on to reading, I have additional listening materials, but we will decide together how much to do till Monday. Okay, and then you should have these done before your actual test. And we also need to finish 8-5, right? So finish 8-5, and then you're gonna do this. But apologies in advance, the first page is actually reversed. So it says zoology, but that's going to be the second of the listening file. What is it? The conversation on the other side of the page is actually the first one. Not that one. Like, the one on the back. So you're supposed to start with this, and then this, and then here. Get it? Only the first page is reversed. The others are in order. Let's see. What are you doing? Are you drawing on her face? She's like drawing on her face. Okay. So how much do you want to do? Because if Huyong were to just do just use the other ones if you want additional listening materials, but do the homework first. Okay? So we have 1 lecture, 2 lectures, 2 conversations, or how much do you want to do? It's up to you guys. Xiyoung doesn't get to go because he's not here.
I think that's enough.
Huh? What do you want to do?
2 lecture and 2 conversation. I think that's really
Good? Okay, and for you, if you want to do more, do more. So Doyeon, is that okay or is that still too much for you? Okay, so 2 conversations, 2 lectures, so you would stop on page 29 because we have 8-5. If you make a mistake and do more, that's fine. Just don't do less. Got it? And I'll be sending you the files via email. You guys have been receiving it properly, right?
Yeah.
Reading. So let's take out the reading materials that was homework and go over the answers. I know you have like a particular way of covering reading with teacher Stephen, and I usually cover it the exact same way as he does when it comes to online reading classes, but since this is just a special occasion and I'm only covering for him this one time, I felt like I could approach it a little differently, just for you guys. So I'm going to mix up Korean a little bit, and I'm going to focus more on going over the questions rather than the mind maps. Okay? You forgot what? Which means you didn't do the homework. Thank you. Okay, that's the kind of respect you show teacher Stephen, huh? Huh? Got it. The answer is at the bottom. And Xiyoung, if you're watching this, I'll be sending this to you via email if I have the electronic version. If teacher Stephen doesn't show up on time, then I'll have him send it to you. Okay. Quinn, did you do the homework?
Oh, no, I couldn't do it.
Oh my god!
Actually, I didn't know that it was homework, but I did some extra reading.
But is this your
material.
first day? Were you born yesterday? I thought you had this class with teacher Stephen for the past like 4 or 5 weeks or so. Okay, then let's do this. Don't look at the answer key. Don't look at it. Don't look at it. Go over them right now. Do it right now. Because there's no point in covering the questions if you haven't done it. And Huyong, are you sure you didn't cover extinction of the dinosaurs?
Yes, but I didn't know it was homework, and I did some extra material Stephen and teacher Stephen about.
What in the world? Okay, so finish extinction of the dinosaurs. You only get 20 minutes per passage, you know that, right?
Yeah.
So for the 14 questions, I'm going to time you 20 minutes, starting right now. What in the world? Lazy kids. vocab. Huh? Wait, your first one is extinction of the dinosaurs, right?
Yep.
And then the vocab that you missed was profound? Or
Profound? Oh, no, wait. The extinction of dinosaurs is the second.
Anyways, for the extinction of dinosaurs, which were the questions that you missed? Just number 7?
Yeah, it was just number 7.
Okay. First of all, let's go over question number 3.
But actually, I also got wrong if it was at number 7, the first passage.
I know. But the first one was like the vocabulary question.
It was okay.
Yeah. Why does the author mention the survival of snakes, lizards, turtles, and crocodiles in paragraph 3? Let's go to the passage. So our topic is dinosaurs. And all of a sudden we're talking about different species of reptiles, right? So if you look at the first sentence of paragraph 3, it says, if true though, then what is true? The previous sentence. So we need to look at the very last part of paragraph 2. It says, perhaps dinosaurs could not tolerate these extreme temperature changes and became extinct. 기후의 문제로 못 버텨서 뒤졌다. Right? Then, if that case is true, why did 다른 냉혈동물, 변온동물, right? Such as snakes, lizards, turtles, and crocodiles survive the freezing winters and torrid summers. 그럼 얘네들은 왜 그걸 버팀? So that's the question. So we're trying to address these different species in order to question the fact that how some scientists believe climate change was the reason behind the extinction of dinosaurs. Right? 만약에 기후가 진짜 문제였다면 왜 얘네들은 살고 다이너솔만 죽음? That's the question. Right? So if you go back, the answer is B. To question the adequacy, 정당성 of the 가설 that climate change related to sea levels caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. Does that make sense now? Alright, so that's why number 3 was D. Alright, now moving on to number 5. According to paragraph 3, which of the following is true of changes in climate before the Cretaceous period and the effect of these changes on dinosaurs. So first, what we got to look at is the Cretaceous period. 기후 변화 before the Cretaceous period. 그 전에 더 옛날에. 그리고 그거의 공룡에 대한 영향. Okay, so we're looking at the climate changes beforehand. So let's look at paragraph 3 first. Let's see. Okay, let's look at the fifth line from the bottom. 밑에서 5번째 줄. 끝에 critics. Did you find it? Critics also point out that 그러니까 그 앞전의 내용을 안 믿는 사람들은 뭐라고 주장을 하느냐? 무엇을 대해서 문제를 제기하느냐? The shallow seaways had retreated from an advance on the continents numerous times during the Mesozoic. So why did the dinosaurs survive the climatic changes associated with the earlier flotation, but not with this one? But this was not talking about the Cretaceous period. 잠깐. The second and third paragraph, no, actually paragraph 2. In the first line, paragraph 2, at the end of the Cretaceous, and then it goes on, right? So paragraph 3 is still talking about the end of the Cretaceous, right? So if paragraph 3 were to imply anything regarding a previous era, then that would be the sufficient information to answer number 5. If we look at that, Mesozoic. Did Mesozoic happen beforehand? If you look at paragraph 1, 세 번째 줄에서 throughout the Cretaceous 해놓고 when is the Cretaceous era? The last period of the Mesozoic era. 그러니까 Mesozoic 안에 Cretaceous가 포함돼 있어. 근데 그 Mesozoic 시대의 마지막이 Cretaceous야. 그리고 now if we go back to paragraph 3. Mesozoic 동안이면은 that includes 근데 만약에 in the beginning of Mesozoic이나 in the middle of Mesozoic 그러면 Cretaceous 전이지. 그래서 그 밑에 바로 밑에 줄에 보면 the earlier fluctuations 그러면 좀 더 전에라고 했으니까 이게 그 전 시대에 해당되는 내용이겠네. Do you see the connection there? 그래서 그 문장을 이제는 안심하고 보자. Shallow seaways 밑에서 네 번째 줄 시작이 Shallow seaways 얕은 해수면이 바닷길이 have retreated from 약간 썰물처럼 뒤로 빠져나간 거야. From in advance 더 앞으로 나아간 것보다. 그래서 advance는 retreat에 대해 반대말로 쓰인 형용사야. On the continents numerous times. 그러니까 왜 그렇게 여러 번 썰물처럼 자꾸 물이 더 얕아지냐는 거지. 얕아졌으니까 해수면이 뒤로 물러났겠지. During the Mesozoic. 그러면 why did the dinosaurs survive the climatic changes associated with the earlier fluctuations? But not this one. 계속 그 시대에 반복적으로 밀물과 썰물 같은 물론 조수의 상황은 아닌데 물이 빠졌다 더 들어갔다 빠졌다 계속 이랬는데 그때는 다 버티다가 왜 마지막에 그거는 못 버텼냐 이거지. Does that make sense? 결국 그 모든 것이 survive the climate changes라고 했으니까 이게 기후변화와 관련된 바다의 해수면의 변화. Okay? 이해됐어? Does that make, I don't think that makes sense. But anyways, 그렇게 봤을 때 let me look at A. Climate changes associated with the movement of seaweeds before the Cretaceous period did not cause dinosaurs to become extinct. 이렇게 되지. Do you understand? Are you sure? Okay. 말 안 되면 다시 얘기해 because sometimes like my words get jumbled. Alright, now look at number 7. This is the sentence summarization, sentence simplification question. So we need to look at the highlighted sentence. I always like to form an outline in class. It's usually going to be more simplified when I'm actually taking the test. But if you look at the highlighted sentence, many plants and animals. 길어. Disappeared. 사라져. I always choose Korean over English when it's shorter, right? 왜냐면 your outlines need to be super simplified as much as possible. 하루는 들어오게. Okay, so disappear abruptly, 갑자기. From the fossil record. As one moves from layers of rock, from the phosphor, as 뭐 하면서 갑자기 사라졌냐면, from layers of rocks, documenting the end of the Cretaceous. 얘네는 Cretaceous period. Up into, 그러니까 move from, up into거든. 여기에서 rocks, 여기 rock 있어. 여기도 rocks. Representing the beginning of the Cenozoic. Okay? That. 많은 동식물이 화석 기록에서 사라져. 그러니까 화석이 더 이상 없어져. 어디에서 어디로 넘어가면서 화석 레코드가 없어지느냐? Cretaceous 시대 말에 있는 돌에서 지층 구조에서 그거에서 Cenozoic 시대 초 다시 말하면은 이 Cretaceous 말이고 Mesozoic도 Cretaceous가 이 끝에 있잖아. 이후에 이 Cenozoic 시대 초로 넘어가면서 시대가 바뀌었지. 이름이 바뀌었어. 여기서 여기로 가는 지층으로 넘어가면서 얘네의 화석이 없어져. 사라지. 그럼 얘네가 이때 없다라는 얘기잖아. Right? 자, 그랬을 때 if we compare this information to the four answer choices, A 봐보자. The fossil record suggests that there was an abrupt extinction of many plants and animals at the end of the Mesozoic. 딱 괜찮지 않아? 그치? 자, 그럼 B 보자. Few fossils면은 거의 없긴 해도 zero는 아니야. Right? Of the Mesozoic has survived in the rocks that mark of the end of the Cretaceous. 일단 few라고 하면 안 되지. 많은 애들이 사라졌다라는 거니까 조금은 남아있었어라는 표현이랑 조금 다를 수 있어. 근데 또 추가로 there's no information regarding this. It's only talking about the Cretaceous period. So it's insufficient. So B needs to be crossed out. Alright? C. Fossils from the Cretaceous period of the Mesozoic up to the beginning of the Cenozoic era. Fossils가 여기서 여기까지가 아니지. 여기 있다가 여기 없다니까. Does that make sense? Have been removed from the 갑자기 누가 없어. 누가 제거했대. If you want to use the word remove, that means it used to be there and then somebody took it away from there. Somebody moved it elsewhere. So that is different information, right? So we need to eliminate C as well. If you look at D, plants and animals from the Mesozoic era were unable to survive in the Cenozoic era. Could be implied. Could be, but it's not talking about the fossil record. And it has less information compared to A, so A just has to be a better answer choice. So A would be your ultimate answer. Okay? 됐어? Alright. So, the longer the sentence that needs to be simplified or paraphrased, the more you need an outline constructed before you move on to the answer choices. I always do this. Alright, so next, moving on to number 8. In paragraph 4, all the following questions are answered except. So if you look at A, why is there a layer of clay between the rocks of the Cretaceous and the Cenozoic? 이 시대 사이의 돌들 사이에 왜 진흙이 한 층 있나? Is there an answer? If you go to paragraph 4, we're just talking about clay. 중간에 그 highlight sentence 뒤에 between the last layer of Cretaceous rock and the first layer of Cenozoic rock, there's often a thin layer of clay. Okay, so that is true. Then why is there a thin layer of clay? Not explained. 그래서 A has been answered. B, why are scientists, 너 몇 번이라고 했어? D만 볼게, D만. Why do scientists want more information about the dinosaur extinctions at the end of the Cretaceous? 왜 Cretaceous 시대 말에 Dinosaurs extinction에 대한 더 많은 정보들을 얻고 싶어 했나? 첫 번째 문장 보잖아. Dissatisfaction with conventional explanations for dinosaurs extinctions. 공룡 멸종에 대한 이전의 그 관습적인 이미 존재하는 설명들이 불만족스러워서 Led to surprising observation. 새로운 거를 발견하기까지 노력이 기울여져. So why did they continue to work on this? Because they were dissatisfied with the original explanation, the existing information. So that is D. It was very difficult to pinpoint the answer to D, but to be more precise, to make it an easier approach, A just could not be answered at all. Okay? All right. So number 끝났어. So now we need to, 14. F가 왜 잘못됐냐면 boundary clay layers like the one between the Mesozoic and Cenozoic, 방금 얘기했던 그 clay, are used by scientists to determine the rate at which an extinct species developed. 그럼 뒷내용에 나온 거랑 맞는 내용이긴 하거든, 방식이야. But it's simply talking about a scientific method in order to collect data. It's too minor. 근데 우리의 main idea sentence는 For a long time, scientists have argued that the extinction of the dinosaurs was related to climate change. 그리고 이걸 뒷받침해줘야 되는데 그거랑 관련된 정보를 얻기 위해서 활용된 수단이 뭔지는 too minor detail이라는 거지. Compared to B, D, and E. If you look at B, a simple climate change does not explain some important data related to the extinction of the dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous. 그러면 위에서 for a long time 얘들이 이렇게 얘기했어. 그러면은 이제 요즘은 그렇지 않은 주장도 나왔어 라는 내용도 뒷받침이 될 수 있는 거잖아. Right? Because it uses for a long time they have. Which means recently there have been other explanations. Right? So B was found in paragraph 3 and therefore would be a better answer choice compared to F. Got it? Okay, so we're going to move on to the next passage. So let's do one more, because I don't think you're going to want to do speaking for like one whole hour. So we're going to do one more reading. Do you need a break?
Not necessarily.
Okay. Wait, Huyang, do you have running water on Mars? No, right? 넌 있어, right? It's the second test. Raise your hand if you absolutely need a break. I'll give you a break for 5 minutes. You don't need one? Okay, so let's get started right away. I'm going to give you a 20-minute time limit. Go. You just know the answers, so I'm going to make those changes as we go along. So keep that in mind. So I'm going to give you the answers myself. Number 1, D, 2B, 3A, 4B, 5A, number 6C, 7C, 8B, 9B, 10B, and 11, I think it's B. It says A on the answer sheet, but I don't think that's correct. 12A, 13A, last but not least, A, B, E. So raise your hand if we need to go over the questions. 1, 2, 3, 4. All good? Okay. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. We're going to start with paragraph, question number 6. But before we begin, did you have too much trouble with any of the paragraphs? With the concepts? No? It was okay? Okay. So let's go over question number 6 then. According to paragraph 2, all of the are true of the outflow channels on Mars except the second paragraph starts describing the outflow channels, right? We need to be able to locate A, B, and D, so let's do that. A, they formed at around the same time that volcanic activities was occurring on the northern plains. If you look at the sentence after the last box, the fourth box, so the fourth line from the bottom, judging from the flow rates must have been truly enormous, perhaps as much as 100 times greater than the 105 tons per second carried by the Great Amazon River, which is located on Earth, right? And as we all know, this entire paragraph was a description of the outflow channels. So, using that info, we can conclude A, all right? All right, B. They are found only on certain parts of the Martian surface. Yes, if you look at the second sentence of the paragraph, the second sentence. So after the first square, they appear only in equatorial regions. And then if you look at the second square, instead, They are probably the paths taken by huge volumes of water draining from the southern highlands into the northern plains, and this only happens in the equatorial regions, okay? So B, they are found only on certain parts of the Martian surface. And then D, they are thought to have carried water northward from the equator. Remember the sentence that I just read? So if we go to the equatorial regions, huge volumes, huge amounts of water are moving from the southern highlands into the northern plains. Get that? So D is correct. Alrighty, now let's look at C. They sometimes empty onto. Just because it uses the word empty doesn't mean they disappear or they go away. Okay, they're simply dumping a certain quantity of water into somewhere else, onto somewhere else. Okay, so where is it dumping the water? What appear to have once been the wet sands of tidal beaches. Because C uses some particular words, especially wet sands, tidal beaches, let's look for those words, okay? So if you go to paragraph 2, it starts using those after the third square, right? So let's look at the sentence after the third square. The onrushing water arising from these flash floods likely also form the odd teardrop-shaped islands, parentheses, resembling the miniature version seen in the wet sand of our beaches at low tide. It's only a mentioning of a resemblance. 그냥 비슷하게 생겼는데 비유를 해준 거야. So that it's easier for you to picture an image in your head. Okay? So therefore, C, actually physically dumping water onto wet sands would be inadequate. Does that make sense? Alright, now looking at number 7. All of the following questions about geological features on Mars were answered in paragraph 3 except, alright, so let's try to answer A. What are some regions of Mars that may have once been covered with an ocean? Okay, so all we need to do is find at least one. Okay, as long as we can find one region that used to be maybe, presumably covered with an ocean, then we can answer A. So that was in the last sentence. If you look at the third line from the bottom, or even the one before that, let's look at the third line from the bottom. Ocean covering much of the northern lowlands. So something is covered here. If you look at the next sentence, there's another one. The Hellas Basin, which measures is, after the comma, is another candidate for an ancient Martian sea. We have two regions that were oceans. Okay, long time ago. So those can be used as to answer A. Now let's look at B. Where do mission scientists believe that the river forming the delta emptied? Okay, so the phrase forming the delta is modifying the river. 다시 forming the delta는 어떤 river인지 수식이야. 그래서 river가 어디다 물을 empty했어? 어디다 물을 옮겼어? Right? 어떤 river? 그 delta, 삼각줄을 형성하는 그 물, 강은 어디다가 물을 이렇게 쏟아냈대? And that one is the third line, where you find the word delta. Delta, a fan-shaped network of channels and sediments where a river once flowed into a large body of water. In this case, a lake filling a crater in the southern highlands. As you can see, delta에 대한 설명으로서 그 뒤에 where a river once flowed as a river가 등장하죠. The river once flowed into a large body of water. 이 물이 어디 안으로 흘러 들어갔대? 더 많은 양의 물이 있는 곳으로 흘러 들어갔대. 이 경우에 이 large body of water는 누구야? A lake filling a crater야. 분화구를 메우고 있는 호수야. 거기 안으로 이 river가 흘러 들어갔대. Do you see that? 그 정보를 사용하면 we can answer B. They believe the river emptied into the lake of a crater. Okay, and then let's look at D. During what period of Mars history do some scientists think it may have had large bodies of water? I think this was the hardest one to eliminate. Although very vague, if you look at the very first sentence of paragraph 3, some scientists speculate, guess, that Mars may have enjoyed an extended, a long, early period, previous era, during which rivers, lakes, and perhaps oceans adorned its surface. Adorns means 꾸미다. Okay? So there used to be different forms of water during the early period, okay, which didn't last, which wasn't very short. Okay? So using that info, during what period of Mars history? An early period. So it's a very, very vague answer, but still we can use that info to kind of give a bad answer to D, right? It doesn't really consist of a lot of information, but still. But if we were to look at C, approximately how many craters? First of all, in the paragraph, only one crater explaining where the river was dumped into. There's only one crater being addressed. There isn't more than one. And therefore, in order to say how many craters on Mars do mission sites believe may once have been lakes filled with water? Well, actually, now that I've looked at it. One second. Going back to the delta sentence, an image shows what mission specialists think may be a delta, where a river was flowed into a larger body of water, in this case, a lake filling a crater in the southern hemisphere. They found one, right? Using an image. And they only talk about one, but then there is no implication on how many more they found or the number of craters that they concluded to have existed in the past. I know it's a bad explanation. But that is the only way to eliminate C. And the only way to choose C over D. But I would cross out number 7. When taking the actual TOEFL test, no question will be this ambiguous. It will be very clear. Okay? As long as you understand all the words and then the implications in each sentence, it will be okay. This is a bad question. Okay, it's a bad question. Well, to be honest, C and D would both be very bad, very bad answer choices, okay? Anyways, now let's just move on. Number 10. Highlight a sentence. As I gave it to you, it was paragraph 4, but detractors maintain that, and if you have looked at the integrated writing template that I gave you, maintain is the same as claim, right? State. So detractors, people that disagree, claim that the terraces geological places, right? Terraces could also have been created by geological activity. And the shoreline, perhaps related to the geological forces so pushing something down. Below so this means if you look at the altitude, okay, if you are checking the altitude, despite the different geographical location, if you check the altitude, because everything can be measured definitively, the altitude of the northern hemisphere ended up being lower than the south. 밑으로 내려갔다는 게 아니라 그냥 그 고도를 봤을 때 고도가 지질학적 어떤 압력, 힘에 의해서 북반구의 고도가 남쪽의 것보다 더 내려갔다는, 고도가 더 낮았어. 그러니까 다른 지역이지만 고도로 따지면. Does that make sense? 약간 산의 높이도 우리가 다 비교할 수 있는 것처럼 다른 지역이지만 여기서 마찬가지로 이 땅이 더 낮은 시대에 있게 됐다라는 거지. Geological forces 때문에. 오케이? 그로 인해서 terraces가 생겼어. 이런 힘 때문에. Okay, moving on. In which case they have nothing whatever to do with Martian water. 이게 맞다면 what does it mean? Irrelevant to Martian water, right? So this would be the conclusion, right? And this is the claim of detractors. Martian water, no, 하는 사람들이 이런 지금 근거를 대는 거예요, okay? So going to the answer choice. A, detractors argue that geological activities may be responsible for the water. No, they're saying water had nothing to do with Mars. Okay. B, detractors argue that the terraces may have been formed by or due to geological activity rather than by water. 이등. Okay. C, but detractors argue that the terraces may be related to geological forces in the northern hemisphere of Mars rather than no. 얘는 그냥 지대의 높낮이 비교를 위해서 사우트가 거론됐을 뿐. And then if you look at D, they argue that geological forces depressed the northern hemisphere so far below the level of south that so A that B는 인과관계, which doesn't exist here, according to the outline. Not between the north and the south hemisphere, the northern and southern hemisphere. And therefore D is wrong. So the only plausible answer would have been B. Alright, 11. According to paragraph 4, what do the 2003 global surveyor data suggest about Mars? 만약에 if you were looking at C, it's insufficient because C is related to a more recent study, which was addressed at the in the last sentence of that paragraph. 두 개 다른 data야. According to 2003, if you go back to the paragraph, it's 11, right? Let's look at the sentence after the highlighted sentence. Furthermore, did you find it? Mars, highlighted sentence 다음 문장. Furthermore, Mars global surveyor data released in 2003 seem to indicate that 뭘 가리켜? The Martian surface가 contains too few carbon and rock layers. 탄소 성분이 부족한 거지, right? 근데 탄소는 오션이 존재했었다라는 가장 결정적인 증거야. 탄소가 적으면 오션이 있었을 확률도 그만큼 낮아지는 거야. Okay? Especially a large body of ocean water. Okay? 그리고 나서 그 다음 줄에 뭐라 그러냐? Their absence supports the picture of a cold, dry Mars. 그렇기 때문에 여기는 바다가 아니고 굉장히 춥고 건조한 지역이었을 것이고 that never experienced the extended time period required to form lakes and oceans. 호수나 바다를 만들어내기에 굉장히 필요한 온화한 기후, 긴 장기적인 온화한 기후가 전혀 없었을 것이다 라는 결론으로 치닫는데, 자 질문과 문제와 상관없이 그 다음 문장을 보면 그러나 more recent data가 자 봐봐라 imply that at least some parts of the planet did in fact experience long periods in the past. 최근의 자료들을 보아하니 어떤 특정 지역만이라도 그러한 온화한 기후를 경험했었을 것이다. 그동안에는 마르스의 표면에 물이 존재했었을 것이다. Okay, there are two different results based on two different data. Okay, so going back to the question. Number 11, A, ancient oceans of Mars contain only small amounts of carbon. Ancient oceans가 탄소를 적게 가진 게 아니라 탄소 성분의 결핍 때문에 여기는 oceans가 있을 리 없었나요? So A is wrong. Okay. 그 다음에 B, the climate of Mars may not have been suitable for the formation of large body. 이 global surveyor data에 의하면 얘네는 아마 바다가 없었을 것이다. 너무 혹독했을 것이다. 고런 물이 없었을 것이다. 이렇게 얘기하는 거야. 그래서 B가 맞는 것 같아. And then C, liquid water may have existed on some parts of Mars surface for long periods of time. This is based on the more recent data. 그리고 D에서 Mars water dried up는 not mentioned. Okay? 자, 13번은 급하게 그냥 빨리 간단하게 할게. These landscape features, 이러한 지형적 특징들은 runoff channels와 달라 in a number of ways. 다양한 방식으로, 많은 방식으로 라고 했을 때 we know paragraph 1 was talking about runoff channels, whereas paragraph 2 starts talking about outflow channels, right? 그렇기 때문에 outflow channels을 이랬을 거야 라고 하고 나서 outflow의 다른 특징들을 얘기하기 앞서서 얘네들 runoff이랑 이렇게 달라라고 먼저 얘기를 해야지. 그리고 다른 점들이 blah 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 listed. Okay? So the answer had to be A. Okay? After the first square, it just continues to talk about outflow channels, nothing else. Okay? 14번은 몇 번 잘못 골랐어? ADF라고 했다고? 두 개나 잘못 골랐네. 근데 I chose A, C, and E. A, B, E가 아니고 I chose A, C, and E. What did you choose? A, B, E?
Yeah, I chose A, B, E.
Right? I chose A, C, E. 왜냐면 B를 보면 runoff and outflow channels of Mars가 higher volume water than the Earth라고 했잖아. 근데 outflow channels were definitely higher in volume in terms of the amount because the simile is the what side of it? The comparison is being made to something of Earth, which was the Amazon River. 근데 in terms of the runoff channels, no such comparison was made. So it's very difficult to actually use the same expression, the comparatives. Does that make sense? That's why I thought B was a less better choice compared to C. It was harder to eliminate C. B랑 C they're very similar. The only difference would be the comparison. So I would have chosen C over B. And then you chose F, right? F는 it is assumed that most of the water once existed on the planet beneath the surface라고 하잖아. 얼어져 있는 상태로 지표면 아래에, 지하에 있을 것이다 라고 하는데 if you go to the last paragraph 다시 가봐. paragraph 5 마지막 줄 보면 the answer may be that virtually maybe is not an assumption. 그럴 수도 있죠.는 추정이 아니고 그냥 it's just guessing. Right? So I think F using the word assumed would have been too strong. And what was the other one? D. Absence of evidence. 라고 하기에는 remember when we were looking at paragraph 4, our recent data indicated that there were obviously certain parts of Mars that had temperate climates. And therefore water would have existed in those regions. And therefore saying there was no evidence would be inadequate. So that's why I eliminated D. Okay? Any final questions? All good? When tackling the last question type, pro summary questions, you should always go with the answer choice that are directly supporting the main idea sentence given in the question. Okay? In this case, it talks about photographic evidence, and then liquid water existed on the surface. Those two are the major details that had to be supported by the answer choices. If it's too minor, like it could have been addressed in the passage, but it just happens to be a little bit of a, smaller detail, or it's just talking about, things that were used to explain something, to make comparisons, or, just simply to list things, then it would be considered a minor detail. If it's only partially correct, then it's obviously wrong. Any information that you utilize when taking the TOEFL test should come from the passage. You cannot use any of your own background knowledge. Okay? All good? Alright, that's it. Okay, after a short break, we're gonna move on to 잠깐 5시에 수업 끝나잖아? 수업 끝났네. 4시 47분.
47분.
5 minutes of speaking, yes? 하나씩만 해보자, 하나씩만. are you both looking at the first one right now? Okay. Some people say that it is better for children or students to go on a field trip. Others say that it is better for them to study in classrooms. I believe it's more important for them to study in classrooms. And obviously, you don't have to personally agree with this. It's just that we chose classroom settings because it's easier to use in making different responses. Okay? Obviously, we all think field trips are better, right? Okay, so moving on to the next paragraph. Expanding knowledge is the most important thing for students because good grades allow them to get into good universities and eventually enter a strong career path. As they get older, a good academic record is one of the things that are required in every career field. However far-fetched this may sound, it is true in today's world, and for this reason, investing more time in other activities may sometimes result in a waste of time. These are the reasons why I believe it is better for them or children to study in classrooms than to go on field trips. You do not need the conclusion unless you have a lot of time remaining. Okay, just keep that in mind. Nobody really cares about your conclusion. They know it's going to be the same as the first sentence. So just use that to fill up the space, if your response happens to be too short. Okay, so using that, let me ask you a question. Should universities use their funds in entertaining students or spending in academics? Then your answer is going to be spending in academics, right? And then you're going to use these examples, right? Expanding knowledge is the most important thing, right? And then academic record is important in your career, in the career field, right? That is true in today's world. So investing more time in these activities, and in this case, it wouldn't be time, investing more funds or more money on these academic or other activities rather than academics would result in a waste of time, okay? So that's how you would utilize these responses.
So I heard that you told me that some students were too nervous and said something different. So
exactly. So they would end up saying like, these are the reasons why I believe it is better for children, right? Yeah. So just try to you have those 50 seconds to take notes, right? Just write the topic so that you can constantly visually remind yourself that this is what you're talking about. Okay? Who's your main audience? And who are you talking about, and what are you going towards, right? What's your goal of this response? Okay, so that's what you're gonna do. So should we give that a shot? I'm gonna ask you the same question. Should universities use their funds in entertaining students or spending in academics? So you will usually get 15 seconds to think, to come up with an answer, but take your time. If you're really good at giving me an answer for this one, then we'll call it a day. If I'm super unhappy with it, we'll do one more. Okay, so go back to this original statement so that you do not get confused. You don't want to lose track. So who's ready? You need to improvise. No matter how perfect your answer is after a long time of preparation, it doesn't matter because it's not going to happen in the actual test. Okay? So, chop chop, let's go. Ready? You go first. Wait, 1 second, I'm going to time you.
Oh, okay.
Ready? Yeah. Go.
I believe it is better for universities to spend their funds in, to use their funds in spending in academics for the following reasons. To begin with, expanding knowledge is the most important thing for the university students, and this will, and as they get older, it will, they will eventually enter a stronger career path. And additionally, as students get older, a good academic record is one of the things that are required in every career.
Just read it. See? Because you felt bad about it, it took too long. Okay? Just go with the flow. Just read it. Let's just assume you have all this memorized by heart. Okay? So as of now, just read it along. Okay? I just want to see the structure and how you utilize it without including random information. Okay? All right. You want to try? And then I'm going to get back to you. You're going to try it again. All right. Let's go.
I believe universities should use their funds in spending in electronics. Expanding knowledge is the most important thing for students because good grades allow them to enter a strong career path. As students get older, a good academic record is one of the things that are required in every career field. However, nowadays,
15 seconds.
investing more time in other activities may sometimes result in a waste of time. These are the reasons why I believe it's better for students to
Universities!
use their funds.
Like I said, don't include conclusion. If there's like 5 seconds left, then don't add the conclusion. Just in case you mess up. Okay? All right, so I'm going to ask you a different question now. Should students participate in club activities or concentrate on academics? Should students participate in club activities or concentrate on academics? Earlier, the subject was universities. Now, they're students. Get it? Okay. So I'm going to give you 15 seconds to prep. Two, one. Okay, let's go. Ready?
Wait, what was the
Question. Should students participate in club activities or concentrate on academics? Begin.
I believe this is better for students to
Concentrate on
concentrate on
academics.
academics for
2 reasons.
wait.
Let's start over. Ready? Okay, the question. Should students participate in club activities or concentrate on academics? You got that?
Should students
Participate in club activities or concentrate on academics. Good? Begin.
I believe it is better for students to concentrate on academics since they're for the following reasons. To begin with, expanding knowledge is the most important thing for the students because good grades allow them to get into good universities and
Good job.
eventually enter a strong career path. As students get older, a good academic record is one of the things that are required in every career field. However, far-fetched this may sound, it is true in today's world, and for these reasons, investing more time in academics may sometimes, participating in club activities may sometimes result in the results of time.
See how to utilize this? Okay. All right, we're just going to call it a day for now.